Welcome to Real Money, Real Experts, a podcast where leading financial counseling and coaching experts share their stories, their challenges, and their advice for helping people manage money in the real world. I'm your host, Rachel DeLeon, Executive Director of the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, or AFCPE.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Mary Bell Carlson, an accredited financial counselor, or AFC, and the president of Financial Behavior Keynote Group. Every episode, we're taking a deep dive in the topics that personal finance professionals care about, helping clients, building community, and your professional growth.
The opinions of our podcast guests are their own, which means that their stories, views, or lived experiences may differ from yours or mine. However, the one thing you will always find on this show is a common thread. Our guests are passionate about helping people with their money to improve their lives, and they believe in upholding high standards for the clients and the communities that they serve. We encourage you to tune in to Real Money, Real Experts with open curiosity. Why? Because it's oftentimes in the conversations where viewpoints or stories differ from our own that we learn the most. Today, we kick off the Symposium Keynote series with two incredible guests, Dave Scherer and Joe Davis of Just Move. Joe is a nationally touring artist, educator, and speaker based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He employs poetry, music, theater, and dance to shape culture. He's taught at hundreds of high schools and universities throughout the country, including New York, Boston, and recently as the artist in residence at Luther in St. Paul. Joe is also a qualified administrator of the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, and a Tommy Award winner for his artistry. Joe has published 3 books with Sparkhouse, including his newest, Unearthing Us. His work has been featured on CNN, BET, and VH1. David Scherer is a speaker, educator, trainer, and performer who has helped facilitate healing justice for individuals and organizations for the past 20-plus years in 45 states and in 7 countries. A qualified administrator in the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, and a trained facilitator for the Kaleidoscope Institute, David brings a grace-based approach to intercultural development and anti-racism that moves away from guilt, blame, and shame. David has taught intercultural development and public leadership at the graduate level, as well as performing at football stadiums across the country. He's also been featured in an ABC documentary for his work fighting world hunger. Welcome, Joe and David.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
For those who haven't heard of Just Move, tell us a little bit about your history, how you met, and what led you to do this work.
Basically, I had been an artist for probably about 15 years doing hip hop music, being an edutainer. I always saw that that hip hop and music and poetry and storytelling could be such a good teaching tool. So I started using that as a teaching tool a long, long time ago. And about 10 years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, I met an amazing, young, charismatic person full of energy and enthusiasm who just had the ability to connect with every human that he talked to. And I think for the work that I do, that's more important than almost anything, is how do you build bridges across difference to be able to reach somebody and inspire them. And so when I saw Joe, I was like, oh, he's got it. And so I said, I want to work with you. He said, I want to work with you. And so we started doing work together. And what's been amazing is that, people, after I started working with Joe, they're like, I think you've gotten a lot better. And I say, well, I have my secret weapon. And so Joe has it's been amazing to see, the work that we've done together. We can reach so many more people. And the relationship, I think, has just been so fruitful. I can only speak for myself, but for me, it's been just amazing to work together and to be able to reach so many different audiences. So I don't know, that's my version of it, Joe. What would you say about our work together?
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely become like a dynamic duo, partners in rhyme, as we like to say, and traveling across the country, we've been able to see the impact that we've had. Like it's been inspiring to me. Like we go and share our stories, and we're both able to share from our own unique perspectives, but coming together through Just Move, it's had an even more powerful impact, and people really seem to be receptive and transformed by sharing that space with us.
I love it. Well, tell us, I want to know a little bit more. David, let's start with you. Who were you before you were Just Move? Tell us about the David before.
Yeah, so I think, for me, about 9 years ago, and spoiler alert, I might mention this story maybe a little bit also in our keynote performance, but when, 9 or 10 years ago, here I am, I'm performing, I also want to just name that the type of music that I was doing is a Black art form historically. And so I'm not black. And so I had a friend say, Dave, you perform this music, and you go into all these spaces, and many of them are white spaces, and you are as comfortable as you want to be. And the reason you're so comfortable is because there are women and people of color and LGBTQ plus folks who are shouldering the discomfort so that you can be as comfortable as you want to be. And that just was like hit me like a ton of bricks, at that moment. And so for me, I realized, as much as it's fun to be the Lone Ranger on the stage, and as much as it's, as fun as it was to buy a house with rap money, like, as I always say, there's actually this responsibility that I have to honor the original people who created this music. I always say you can't love this music and hate the people who created this music. And so for me, I had to figure out, at first I was just going to walk away. I was like, I'm done with this. I need to make room for others. But the same friend who was kind of saying like, hey, this, if you're not, honoring the original spirit of hip hop, this is racist. And they did use that word with me, which hurt. They said, no, don't walk away. They said, you need to hold the door behind you, because otherwise they're just going to go get white guys with guitars for these gigs. So there, so you need to make sure that there's other folks who can walk behind you. Michelle Obama said, hold the door behind you for others. Don't let it slam behind you. And so at that moment, I got scared, because I said like, oh my gosh, this kind of privilege, power, possessions, position that I'm hoarding, it's scary to think about inviting somebody else into that. Like, what if they don't like, what if they like Joe better than me, or whoever it is better than me? Or what if I can't make a living? All the questions that we ask. And then what happened was, that I didn't necessarily see coming, was as Joe and I began to work together more and more, what I saw was actually abundance on the other side of my fear. And I saw deeper relationship, and I saw just things that I would never have been able to imagine. So this power that Joe and I have been able to build, this collective power, it was way bigger and better and more amazing than whatever the power was that I was hoarding for myself. And I just think about that for people, especially for financial people who are kind of asking these questions of, how do I want to be responsible with my resources? How do I want to stay true to my own integrity? I would just encourage them, sometimes when you give it away, you actually receive more when you start to get into this abundance mindset instead of the scarcity mindset. So that's been a huge learning for me. That's been my experience.
Now, Joe, tell us about you. What was happening before you met David?
Yeah, so I'm an artist, author, and activator of joy, as I like to say. I'm a man of many hats. So I do music, poetry, theater. A lot of people know me as, a writer and performer. I use poetry to power possibility. So as a kid, I was already writing poems and stories and songs, but it became really transformational for me when I got sick. Still in elementary school, I got sick. I passed out on the bathroom floor, was rushed to the emergency room, had to be hospitalized. And for several years, I was super sick, but I was using writing and drawing to help me process these really heavy experiences. And what I didn't realize at the time is I was using art to help me metabolize trauma and manage my emotions. And so art helped save my life. And at first it was this deep, personal, vulnerable inner journey for me. But I had really beautiful mentors who saw that I had this gift, and they encouraged me to share it with other people. And I was really nervous at first. I was like, I don't know if I want to share, these kind of raw, real stories with people. But once I finally did, I realized that other people connected. I thought I was going to be judged or humiliated or embarrassed, because no one wants to, be vulnerable in front of people. That's not a very popular thing, right? But once I started to share from this vulnerable space and just be really open and honest and authentic, I realized other people connected too. And it gave kind of this permission for us all to go deeper. And art became this catalyst for healing. And so that's what I do. That's my life's work. My life's work is using art as a catalyst for healing. That's what I put into my books, into my theater productions. And when Dave and I hold space together, we're able to have a gracious invitation for people wherever they are on that journey to meet them where they're at and invite them As Dave said, that power of collaboration and community is way more powerful than you can do it alone by yourself. A lot of what we hold is so heavy, and we feel like we gotta just, be tough, and that rugged individualism that we're so oftentimes taught, especially in a Western American context, just doesn't help us, you know, heal and find that collective liberation. And so where Dave and I meet is like where we're able to bring people into that space of collaboration, of community, of collective liberation. And we use art as one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit.
So powerful. And there's several words that sort of came up that really resonated with me. But the idea of this trauma and fear and that comes out is really prevalent with members in our community as they're working with clients and their issues with money. And, there's such vulnerability in asking for help or reaching out or navigating some of those processes. And it makes it even more important that as professionals that are working with individuals across, all genders, race, backgrounds, that we're able to meet them where they are and to really approach that with curiosity.
When Joe and I teach culture, culture is learned, shared, and unspoken. And so many of us receive this implicit curriculum about money and time and conflict and all, but we don't know we're receiving it. And so then,
right.
It's not until we encounter a different way, or, some of us maybe find a partner or something where we say, oh, and then we begin to interrogate those cultural patterns that we grew up with and then say, oh, I didn't even realize I was getting training on money about who was good, who was bad. Were rich people good or were they bad? Were poor people good or were they bad? What is enough? Like all those things are like modeled for us, but we don't even know we're receiving it. So I don't know. I was just resonating with what you're saying in terms of that messaging that people have to unpack when they get later in life and say, are these actually the values that I want to have? Or, do I want to adapt?
And I think you said the magic word too. You mentioned curiosity, right? How do we move from fear into curiosity? And that's one of our driving ethics. We always want to move from what we call, there's fear and scarcity into this curiosity and this joy and abundance. Because so oftentimes doing this work, people leave like a session about culture or race or power, and they feel worse than they did when they came, right? But how do we hold that space? We're saying, hey, we want to invite you not into guilt, blame, and shame, but into curiosity. And let's just like ask these questions together in a safe enough space to bring our full selves.
What kind of advice would you give to someone about starting to foster that culture of curiosity? So much of what we have learned, and I'm going to get it wrong, but unspoken, we don't necessarily see it in the moment. And then we have these realizations that there are these biases and things we've learned along the way. So what do you share without, giving us everything all today? But what are some of those things that you would tell someone who wants to approach life with a little bit more curiosity?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I would say is like, don't beat yourself up, because we're all on this journey together and we're going to have those first thoughts. Dave and I oftentimes talk about how we can't stop telling stories about each other, about ourselves. Like as soon as you meet someone, you're storifying. You come up with a story. Some might call them biases, but we're storied beings. And so we're going to make up those first thoughts. But to have a better second thought, right? And that takes practice. These big changes aren't going to happen overnight, but have grace with yourself, be patient, and lean into what we call compassionate curiosity, which is minimizing the assumed characteristics and maximizing what's discovered, what can be joyful and what can be surprising. That's a daily practice. I talk a lot about practice because practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes progress. And so how can we create these spaces where we practice together? And we're going to mess up. It's going to be messy, awkward, uncomfortable, but if we have, our hearts are in the right place and we know we want to create this world of beauty and healing, let's keep practicing every day together.
I think one of the things you're going to enjoy about this upcoming symposium too is the diversity within financial counseling. So many financial counselors come from so many different walks of life, whether it be gender or racial or even overseas. We have counselors all over the world with different backgrounds and different stories to share. And so I'm really excited to see how that plays out as you guys go on stage and they connect. I heard David say a bit earlier of this idea of a mirror as well as a window. And I think they'll be able to really connect with that. Tell us a little bit more of what our listeners can expect to walk away from after attending your session at this conference?
Good question. So one of the questions we always ask is, what do you want people to think, do, and feel as a result of being a part of this thing? And so I think for us, one of the things that we would love is if people, those who carry anxiety about these conversations of difference, would be able to just feel held in a space of grace enough to be able to explore them without judgment. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that, when people are saying problematic things, of course, we're going to try to call them out / call them in to continuing to improve. But what it does mean is that these conversations that we've stopped having because they're so fraught for people, that they'll just feel a little bit more encouraged to have those. So that's one piece, just starting those conversations being held. I think secondly, we want people to start thinking about what are the spaces that I inhabit, and what are the identities I bring, and what power do I bring? So as we talk about power, I think one of the important things will be, all of us have some form of power in some way, shape, or form. So how do we claim the agency that we do have? And then for those of us who maybe have been given too much power in situations, how can we move back and make space for others whose voices need to be heard? So you'll be challenged on that a little bit as well. And then lastly, as we go into race a little bit, we want people to start to identify, what is my own, especially for folks like myself who have been raised white, what is my racialized story? What is my story of race? How can I be aware of how that might show up when I'm, meeting with somebody to do a counseling session? What do I bring into that, and how can I meet somebody where they are? So hopefully we'll give you a few tools to explore these differences. We'll give you some reflective steps, but also lastly, I think some of the embodiment that we try to practice, both in our movement that we provide, in some of the somatics that we talk about in terms of body awareness, like really learning how to embody this stuff. The last thing I'll say is, there's an Indonesian proverb that says that wisdom is just a rumor until it lives in the muscle. So I think a lot of us, we read the books, we know the things, we can pass the test and check the right box, but our bodies haven't gotten the memo quite yet. And so how do we actually make sure that our bodies are practicing the justice that we seek in the world? And so we'll try to give at least a couple tools to feel, what does that feel like in your body when you're really practicing justice, when you're practicing reconciliation and healing? That's some of what we'll provide in a very brief keynote if we've done our job, right?
Yeah, and one of the thoughts I want to share is, I love that you keep using this word practice, right? Just like Joe shared earlier, practice makes progress. And so tell us a bit more about how that came about and what that means to you and others in the audience.
We do best what we do most, right? And I think the reason why we don't always feel as comfortable and confident having conversations around, culture or power or race is because we don't have a lot of conversations around culture
Yeah.
and power and race. And maybe we've been told stories that, about, we're not good at it, or it's unsafe, or it's scary. And so after we were able to unpack those stories in a safe enough space, or as I like to call a brave space, it's like, how do we start to practice having these conversations and practice listening to, the wisdom that we do have, because we have so much resilience and wisdom. We're actually carrying forward this legacy of those who have gone on before us. If we look out, we have lots of possibility models of people who are doing this. Look at our ancestors throughout history, these multiracial coalitions of people who have fought to, abolish slavery and desegregation, and people who are still doing this work to this day. So there's lots of possibility models about how to do this work. We can learn from them and with them and build on that legacy. To me, that's all a practice. Like, we can practice envisioning and embodying this world we long to live in together. And every day, every time we're in community together, we have an opportunity to learn something new, to grow, to develop, to go beyond where those who have gone on before us. We kind of have this responsibility and this opportunity to go even further. So that's what the practice is all about for me. I'm not an expert. I'm a practitioner, right? I'm a practitioner. I say I'm not the sage on the stage. I'm the guide alongside. And I just want to be in community with fellow practitioners who are trying to do this thing, who are trying to live this life of joy and beauty and justice.
If I can just add to that real quick. So
Please.
Joe and I we use this developmental model. And so this was a model that we learned. We are both qualified administrators of the intercultural development inventory. And part of the methodology with that is we believe that in human development, the way it works is you don't start out with Mozart, you start out with chopsticks. And you don't start out slam dunk with, 360 slam dunks. You start out with layups, and this work is similar. Both anti-racism work and interculturality starts with, okay, I'm going to start from the beginning. There's two ways to do this work, imperfectly or not at all. So I'm going to try to start on the journey, and it might be imperfect, but I'm going to learn as I go. And as long as we can be teachable spirits, I think that's really the key, that posture of humility as we learn and grow. Then, they say it's impossible to learn and look good at the same time. So I'm going to have moments where it doesn't feel good and I don't look good, and that's okay. I need to get over myself and have grace for myself and compassion and keep moving forward. I think so many of us get mired in guilt and shame that we give up, and so we never get to the 3-pointer, or we never get to the, I don't know, I'm a basketball player, so that's my analogy here. But, we try to lay up and then we say, oh, I can't play, so I'm going to walk away, instead of let me keep getting back in there and see if I can keep getting better. So that's what we want people to do.
So I'm curious, for our listeners who want to start making that actionable step forward and start to build bridges across cultural differences and to challenge themselves to, embrace a little bit of the discomfort, what's one small step they might take today to start that process?
Well, one practice Dave and I invite people into, we call it a racial biography, and it's going throughout your life and thinking about all the experiences you had around race. Because sometimes people don't even, some people are very aware of some of those racial dynamics. Some people have never really thought about it. So just developing a practice around that and saying, okay, let me even just start maybe for the next 24 hours and think about all the differences that are in the spaces that I'm in and how am I responding to those differences. Like when I go to the coffee shop, when I go to the grocery store, how are people similar to me? How are they different from me? And how am I responding to those differences? And then you can even go from throughout your entire life, from starting from when you were young to where you are now, and saying, yeah, let me think about all those differences that I've encountered, how I've responded to them. And just start like writing about them, journaling about it. We have some documentation we could share with folks that kind of give more explicit direction to that process, but really just really practicing that curiosity when it comes to cultural and racial and power differences.
Oh, I was just going to jump on that assignment a little bit more that Joe gave to people, is that also, part of that, when we talked about windows and mirrors, I think doing those metacognitive questions, both in familiar spaces and unfamiliar spaces, is really key. So as Joe mentioned, the coffee shop. Okay, I'm going to go to the coffee shop that I always go to, and I'm going to sit with, 3 40-year-old white men, okay, or 5 40-year-old white men. But I'm going to ask myself, okay, how are they similar? How are they different? What am I doing about the difference? Am I judging it, minimizing it, seeing it, adapting my own behavior to account for it? And then now I'm going to go to an unfamiliar space. And now I'm at a Black-owned coffee shop, and there are 4 Black women who are all in their 20s. And okay, you remember how there were contours of difference that were present with the 40-year-old men in their 40s? I'll bet there's similar nuance and contours of difference that are present here with these women, instead of the danger of a single story. And so then that's the muscle that we continue to flex. And Joe and I always say that if you can't see those differences that are present right under your nose, like right in those quote unquote monocultural spaces, if you can't see the difference that's present there and respond to it and make somebody feel more welcome and included, then what makes you think that you're going to, get in some spaceship and travel to a faraway land where difference is present that are maybe more fraught and show up well in that space? So the practice field is all around you. There's always grist for the mill for this development, and everything is an opportunity to learn and to grow. So I hope people will just remember that every single time you meet with somebody to do some financial consulting, that's an opportunity to look, how are we similar? How are we different? And what am I doing about that difference? So it's not, this isn't like necessarily rocket science in terms of having to travel far away or having to go way far away to find that diversity. It's all around you at all times.
Well, okay, I have to ask this question because the professor in me wants to know, is there a book you would recommend to help us take these steps?
I know you probably have some of your recommendations, Dave. I'll share at least a couple of mine. So One of my favorite books when it comes to this conversation is Resma Minikim's My Grandmother's Hands. He's one of our friends and mentors, so I highly recommend that book. And then Adrienne Marie Brown also has some beautiful work too. She's a poet and author. One of her more popular books, I mean, a lot of her books are really popular, but Emergent Strategy is a book I come back to again and again and again as well. So My Grandmother's Hands, Emergent Strategy. Dave, I'm sure you got a couple you want to throw out there too.
Yeah, so one resource, it's both a book and it's a resource by a woman named Erin Meyer, who it's called The Culture Map. And in the Culture Map, she takes a look at these they're called cultural general frameworks that Hofstadter and some of these sociologists came up with in the 70s or whatever. But these are, for example, scheduling, fighting, decision making. There's probably 8 of these that she maps. And so she has organizations and individuals map themselves along the lines of, where are you on this continuum? Are you more monocultural or, do you have what we would call monochronic or polychronic? One orientation around time or multiple orientations around time? So some people, you say 9 o'clock, you show up right at 9 o'clock. Some people, if you say 9 o'clock, that means get there when you can. And, so she helps people start to reflect on, oh, I have these patterns and where am I? And how does that relate to my own culture? If I grew up in the American culture, which is a very task-based culture, do I resonate with that? Or maybe I'm more relationship-based. And so it's nuanced, right? Not everybody from a culture exhibits the same behavior of that culture. So you start to see both how it's nuanced, but also have more awareness so you can remember that when somebody shows up at 9:07, it might be that they're just wanting to disrespect you and they hate you. And it might be that they're just more polychronic and they just have a different understanding of time and they talk to their grandma and they got carried away in the conversation and, that mattered in that moment. And so deal with it for 7 minutes. So anyway,
that is my husband.
And me.
Exactly. And if you're in Liberia, I mean, so just as an example, I don't want to go too long here, but so just as an example, if you were in Liberia and if I was going to meet down with hey, I'm excited to do this financial consulting with you. And if they said, normally I would need to talk to you, I would ask you about your family. I would build that trust before we ever dove into this work together, right? And that person wouldn't necessarily even trust you until you started to build that relationship. However, in the US culture, of course, it's like, okay, I don't want to waste your time. Let's get right into it. But it's important to remember that not everyone is wired that way. So I always love to sort of feel it out and see okay, if this person is more relationship based, I need to slow down and make sure they trust me before I just start talking about deep things like finances and, deep values. So figuring that out. Whereas other people might say, okay, why are you talking about your family and your feelings? Let's get on with it. Don't waste my time. So it's just important to remember that. And I think that book helps us remember that.
So Dave and Joe, at the end of every interview, we always ask our guests to share their 2 cents. If you had one piece of advice to leave with our listeners today, what would it be?
I would say, I'm ever the optimist and the hopeful person in this work. And so I just want to encourage people to, as much as I talk about practice, I see hope as a practice as well. So keep looking for those ways that you can find hope and practice that, right? Look to what I call possibility models. So possibility models are those people who are doing this work of healing and justice in the world. I think we need to collect possibility models and examples of what it looks like to live in the world we long to live in. Because if we look at the news, or I don't think it should be called the news, it should be called the worst things that are happening near us. Because that's what it feels like. We're just inundated with so much negativity and cynicism and pessimism. I think we gotta cultivate a practice of hope and joy and looking to people and organizations and those who are really doing this work and say, oh, you know what? This is possible. We can live in a world of beauty and healing and justice. And so that's what I would tell people, just to encourage them and say, hey, you got what it takes to do this work. Just look around. We got this together.
Joe stole mine a little bit because we're always on the same wavelength. But I would say, yeah, absolutely. We say culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And so how do we build cultures that can contain this liberation, that can hold us in this discomfort? Because I think a lot of times when Joe and I work with people and they say, oh, this is great, thanks so much, I can't wait to do this. And I say, great, who are you going to do it with? And they go, oh, I'm just going to bootstrap it myself. I'm just going to do this individual work. And we say, oh, good luck with that, because you're going to opt out very quickly. The work gets hard, it gets uncomfortable. So what Joe is saying, this practice, what would it look like for us to develop communities of practice? So I belong to a group of, cisgender, straight, white men that get together every other week, and we go through, we cry together, and we share these stories together where we've nailed it, failed it, and don't know what to do about it. Those are the three buckets that we talk about. And so the reason why we do that, and people might say, well, you're self-segregating. Why would you ever do that? Well, first of all, people self-segregate all the time, but they don't. But secondly, the reason we do that, and Joe and I might get into this a little bit more, is that we need to hold some of this discomfort. We don't need Joe to come in and comfort us, and because we're awakening to our own racism, and now he's trying to comfort us, even though he's the one who's been harmed by this racism, right? Why does he need to comfort us? So part of this is like, find other people who you can do this work with, and build a culture that can hold you when you can't hold yourself. What are the songs that we would sing together? Like Joe said, who are my possibility models? Who are the people that will carry me in this work when it gets hard? And if we don't have that, friends, I think we're going to struggle. So please find your community. All it takes is, two other people. We have a group of 5 or 6, but you could do it with 3, get together, talk about it.
Thank you so much, David and Joe. We really appreciate you joining us today. We're looking forward to seeing you on the stage. Can you please tell our listeners where they can connect with you?
Yeah, so I want to lift up Joe's work, because Joe does this work both with me, but he also does other really important work as well. So joedavispoetry.com, and he can maybe tell you more. But justmoveculture.com is the work that we do collectively, the two of us. But Joe, anything else you want to say about the individual work that you do? I know you got something coming up here.
The same thing. I was going to say justmoveculture.com, joedavispoetry.com. I am launching a wellness program, Find Your Freedom Practice, Wellness Through the Arts. And so that just centers on mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being using art as a catalyst. So that's launching later this month. And just excited to be finding new ways to deepen the impact of the work that we're doing together.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel, that was awesome. I think it was just so empowering to hear this idea of, I know I'm stuck on this, but practice makes progress was so freeing to me. And just the sheer fact that I felt like I could go up and ask David or Joe a question that you just can't ask other places, right? Like there's not that safe place to be able to ask and have these conversations. And I really appreciate AFCPE bringing this in and being able to say, it's okay. We can ask questions. You can be curious. In fact, that was one of the things that Joe mentioned, is this compassionate curiosity. And that's honestly, if you think about it, that's what travel is, right? Like you're curious about other places, other cultures, other things. And how can we apply that now within our practice? How can we apply that with each other and not sit on opposite sides of the fence or even point fingers and say, well, you're not doing it the way I would do it. At the end of the day, it's how that abundance mentality that David brought up of how do we bring this together? And I really love David's story, how he, as a white man who loved hip hop, felt this is alone. And until he met Joe and was able to connect with Joe, it wasn't complete. That to me was a really beautiful picture of how that abundance mentality and more than one, us working together is greater than us alone. I think that's just a great way to summarize what we're going to get in November.
Yeah, Mary, I think that's just, it really resonates with me, the power of our intersectionality. I mean, it is our differences that makes AFCPE and the work we do so special. And, when we talked about the keynote speakers for this year and we're looking at who to bring in, the first conversation I had with Dave, I was like, we've got to bring these guys to AFCPE. The work that they're doing, I think, is really going to resonate with our community. I think it's going to be really powerful for us as individuals, for the relationships that we're building within a very diverse community. But also, I think we're going to learn a lot of things to continue to grow in the work that we do with clients and students and really making impact across the country. So excited for this one. And for those who are coming to Symposium, this is on Friday. This is our last session of the Symposium. So if you're thinking about ducking out early, don't do it this year. I promise you it'll be worth it to stay and hear these guys in person. Which, Mary, brings me to a question for you as we're gearing up for a Symposium. And for our listeners out there who may be thinking, do I want to travel this year? Am I going to register virtually? What first brought you to Symposium?
Well, a woman named Dottie Durbin. Everything goes back to Dottie in my world. And it was as a student and coming in that realm. But what continues to bring me back year after year, and it's the people. I mean, every time I go back, these are friends now that for over 2 decades, I come back and I see, and I don't get to see them but once a year in person. And that connection, and I think so many people resonate with those. I'm coming back to see my friends, and it's kind of a fun trip to be able to take and connect with those around. Now, if you're new to the community, you're not going to have 2 decades worth, but here's what we say is come, see, be a part of it, because you will find those connections there. AFCPE is one of the most welcoming communities. If you've only experienced us virtually, oh man, you are missing out, because virtually is great. But if you go in person, you actually get, if you want, the real hugs, the real connections, the real handshakes. That's to me where the power really comes in. Is it's great to have meetups and coffee chats and things throughout the year, but this is kind of the key highlight of the entire year. And it's a great way to end the year, right? So you've worked hard all year, and it's really nice to cap it off with these connections and pats on the back from people that you don't know yet. Every time I go every year, I mean, I talk about the people I've known for 20 years, but really every year I go, I meet new people that, as Joe said earlier, that compassionate curiosity. What are you working on? I had no idea you were doing this. And it just makes more and more connections. So even though there's people I know from the past, every time I go, there's people I meet this year that continue on into my future, right? Which is good for your business as well. So if you're running your own private practice, it's one thing to sit in, speaking as a solopreneur myself, it's lonely sometimes. And being able to get out and connect with others, especially for those who don't have that day-to-day business connection, I think it's fantastic, because that's when you get new ideas. That's when creativity is sparked. That's when your business, you may meet someone, and I'll go back to Joe and David. David was running his own business and it was fine, but it wasn't until he met Joe that really capsulized and really shot them off into a whole different realm. Same thing exists in our world, right? Have you met your Joe yet, metaphorically speaking, to be able to cap you off and take you on in a space that you haven't been before? And I think that's what Symposium does. So regardless of the reasons that you initially come, you keep coming for the connections, not only of the past, but of the present and the future as well.
Yeah, I love that. We always say, I mean, the knowledge, the content, the curriculum, everything you take away at Symposium is super rich. But some of the most powerful things are the conversations in the hallways. And, whether you're introverted, extroverted, there's space for you and people welcome you in. Those are some of my favorite stories. People who have, private practitioners that found their partner within the hallways in a conversation. We interviewed someone last week who was a presider, so introduced a session and ended up purchasing their business. And so these conversations happen when you least expect it, and that is the magic that is AFCPE Symposium.
Rachel, I have to admit too, I could hardly tell you sometimes what city we're even in for Symposium because I don't leave the hotel. And I know that sounds ridiculous to some, because you're like, you flew all this way, but the best part is actually happening inside those walls. So regardless of where the conference takes place, the best part is the connections that happen inside. So there are some great things in Columbus. You tell me all about it, and I'm really excited to see it come to your hometown and really get connected there in Columbus. But really, the magic takes place within those walls, regardless of what hotel or what city or what location we're in. The magic is the people that come.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Columbus is sort of this hidden gem in the Midwest. And, we are a retail capital of the world, but we have the culinary culture in Columbus, Ohio, actually where the Hilton is, where we'll be staying downtown. There's so many great shops and restaurants and fun things to do right outside the hotel walls. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak more highly of the community itself. It has that Midwest feel, which is always welcoming, very representative of AFCPE, but it has a big city kind of vibe too, with things to do. So Buckeye football, stick around for the weekend if you're into Ohio State sports. But very much to your point, we put together a really intentional program to engage you while you're there. And while I always encourage people to step outside and get some sunshine, we will keep you busy and hopefully walking away feeling really invigorated for the work you do and excited about the year ahead. So for anyone who's interested in joining us this year, as Mary said, it's in Columbus, Ohio, November 20th through 22nd. We'll put a link in the show notes, but we encourage you to attend. If you're listening to this podcast episode when it comes out, early bird registration ends September 30th, and regular online registration will end at the end of October. If you cannot attend in person, we have something for you as well. This year, we're actually recording all of our breakout sessions. So between on-demand sessions, breakout sessions, live stream general sessions where you can hear from keynotes like Dave and Joe, there's something for you, and we encourage you to join us this fall.